It starts with the seeds of a rape plant, which are completely toxic to humans. In order to make canola oil, these plants...
This is true. The seeds of a rape plant are toxic to humans. They have to be lowered in erucic acid, which I'm going to say right now.
These plants must be specially bred to lower the levels of erucic acid, a toxic fatty acid strongly associated with heart lesions. These seeds are then ground at high temperatures to extract the fragile oil, which is inevitably oxidized because of this harsh process.
The name canola is an acronym for Canadian Oil Low Acid. There's no such thing as a canola plant. That was made up by the Canola Association a few decades ago. Canola is not a plant. Rape seeds are a plant, but that plant has never been food for humans. Canola is a special variety of rapeseed with low erucic acid being a harmful thing for humans. If we have to take erucic acid out of a plant, why are we making oil out of that plant in the first place? And when you grind it up and heat it, it's going to become oxidized. Canola oil contains between 1.9 and 3.6% trans fatty acids, which are formed in the process of heating and hydrogenation and oxidation. And this is a pretty significant level. When oils like canola or soybean oil say zero trans fat, that is not true. Manufacturers can technically say that if they have less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving. Well, a serving of oil is usually only 14 grams, a tablespoon, maybe even a teaspoon. But if the oil is 1.9 to 3.6% trans fatty acids, they're actually getting pretty close to that threshold, though they're not exceeding it. But do you want to eat an oil that's 1.9 to 3.6% trans fatty acids? Definitely not if those are trans fatty acids from vegetables. Conjugated linoleic acid and other trans fatty acids in animal foods have actually been associated with health improvements. While we know very clearly, I don't think anyone would debate this. And in fact, Ansel Keys himself was the one who discovered that trans fatty acids raise LDL, and further research, not necessarily by him, but by others, clearly strongly associated trans fatty acids from vegetable and plant oils with severely bad health outcomes. It appears that trans fatty acids formed from the hydrogenation, the heating of polyunsaturated vegetable oils inhibit prostacyclins and promote thromboxane in the clotting process, being pro-clotting and anti-thrombolytics, making it more likely that you will clot.
This oil must then be washed with solvents like hexane, a known neurological toxin.
Hexane is a known neurological toxin. It appears that the amount of hexane in canola oil is about 8 parts per million. Now, it's debatable whether this is something that is going to impact humans negatively. But do you want you or your kids or your family ingesting significant known amounts of hexane, a known neurological toxin, if you can avoid it?
Then it must be processed with bleaching and deodorization so it doesn't smell rancid like it really is. After all of these steps, the canola oil is left oxidized, contaminated with solvents, and containing significant levels of trans fatty acids. And this oil is marketed to you as healthy by the American Heart Association and found in so many of our foodstuffs today. If you want to be healthy...
That's true. The American Heart Association gives canola oil its little check mark, which is essentially the American Heart Association seal of approval. Manufacturers must pay for that, which is a whole different discussion and a whole different bag of worms about corruption with the AHA and the millions of dollars that they have gained by putting these heartly heart labels on foods and who decides what's heart healthy. So here's the AFP fact check article, and they say posts mislead on the health effects of seed oils. Health experts say consumption of seed oils can be beneficial if not included in highly processed foods. I'm not exactly sure how highly processed foods versus non-highly processed foods is going to change the way seed oils work in your body. Considering that seed oils themselves are highly processed. What about a salad dressing with seed oils? Is that highly processed? So I think this is kind of hand-waving voodoo to kind of hedge their bets and say, oh, seed oils are fine for you if they're not in highly processed foods. One thing that is not debatable is that polyunsaturated fatty acids get stored in your body. Your body can interconvert saturated and monounsaturated fats, so we can get rid of saturated or mono and shift, but we can't get rid of polyunsaturated fats through any sort of enzymatic process. They are stored in your body and then slowly get removed from the cell membranes based on the flux of fats that you're taking into your body. Composition of lipids in human serum and adipose tissue during prolonged feeding of a diet high in unsaturated fat. And you can see here that based on their adipose tissue linoleic acid rise in men on the experimental diet from 11% of total fatty acids to 32% at 5 years, they could fit to an exponential function with a half-life of 680 days. So this is probably the best and one of the only pieces of evidence we have looking at the actual pharmacokinetics of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it says exactly what the person was saying on TikTok or Instagram that the fact check article seems to be dubious of. So I'm not sure where I submit a complaint to fact check the fact check. People who wrote this fact check article decided to talk to Darius Mozaffarian, and he says that seed oils are beneficial for humans, and these claims are misleading. And we don't get to have any discussion about it. Instagram will censor the post, stop promoting it, and we don't have any ability to have discussions about contentious or interesting topics on Instagram. This is my assertion that there is plenty of evidence that seed oils are going to increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So let's start with this study first. The title is Effects of an Oleate-Rich and Linoleic-Rich Diet on the Susceptibility of Low-Density Lipoprotein to Oxidative Modification in Mildly Hypercholesterolemic Subjects. Basically, they're saying we're either going to feed people olive oil or oils that are high in oleic acid, or we're going to feed them seed oils high in linoleic acid and see how fragile their LDL is. See how susceptible to oxidation their LDL particle is. It is pretty well established within cardiovascular medicine, Western medicine in general, that if your LDL is oxidized, that is a major risk factor, perhaps causative of atherosclerosis. Macrophages don't take up native LDL. They only ingest oxidized LDL in the subendothelial space. And imagine this. So this was an 8-week diet, and what they found is noted here, that LDL oxidation is altered by adding polyunsaturated fats. Substitution of monounsaturated rather than polyunsaturated fats for saturated fats in the diet might be preferable for the prevention of atherosclerosis, meaning that, as you see here, LDL isolated from subjects on the oleic acid diet was less susceptible to copper-mediated oxidation as measured by conjugated dienes and lipid peroxidation formation, and less susceptible to LDL protein modification as evidenced by reduced LDL macrophage degradation after copper or endothelial cell oxidation. When you give people more polyunsaturated fats, their LDL is more likely to be oxidized, both in vitro and in vivo models. How about another one? Changes in dietary fat intake alter plasma levels of oxidized LDL and Lp(a). Lp(a) is a very known strong risk factor for cardiovascular disease. In this study, 37 healthy women fed 2 diets. The saturated fat intake was decreased from 28 grams to 20 grams. And the amount of polyunsaturated fat was increased from 11 grams to 13 or 19 grams. And what did they find? The amount of oxidized LDL in the plasma went up when you do that. When you have less saturated fat and more polyunsaturated fats, the oxidized LDL goes up. So the median plasma oxidized LDL increased by 27% in response to the low-fat, low-vegetable diet, and 19% in response to the low-fat, high-vegetable diet. Also, the Lp(a) concentration was increased by 7% and 9% respectively. They're saying the low-fat diet in respect to lower saturated fat, but as you see here, they are increasing the polyunsaturated fat. So solid evidence that increasing polyunsaturated fat, lowering saturated fat causes more oxidized LDL. Impact of 8-week linoleic acid intake in soy oil on Lp(PLA2) activity in healthy adults. Lp(PLA2) is lipoprotein phospholipase A2, generally regarded as an indicator of endothelial inflammation, in quotation marks, endothelial damage, endothelial remodeling. An increase in plasma linoleic acid following intake of soybean oil independently associated with Lp(PLA2) activity, which was also related to ApoB, OXLDL, and CEPI-CT, which is collagen epinephrine closure time, an indicator of endothelial function. So yet another study says that soybean oil, just given to people, not in processed foods, increases the CEPI-CT, which is an indicator of endothelial function, meaning it's getting worse. You're getting more oxidized LDL, and you're getting an increase in LPPLA2, which cannot possibly be a good thing. The effects of diets rich in monounsaturated fatty acids on plasma lipoproteins, the Jerusalem nutrition study, high MUFAs, monounsaturated fatty acids, versus high PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's 26 students randomly assigned to a 24-week crossover study. Again, all of the studies I have shown you are randomized, controlled study. There was a significantly higher tendency toward lipid peroxidation on the PUFA diet, whereas with the monounsaturated fat, the susceptibility of LDL to oxidative stress is lower. Let's recall the whole point of that little excursion. Experts say that seed oils, not in processed foods, are healthy. Blog and social media posts claim many vegetable oils, such as those from sunflower and canola, can promote inflammation that leads to heart disease and other ailments. I would say that oxidized LDL, LP(a), thiobarbituric acid or TBARS substances, CEPI, CT, all of those are in some ways inflammatory and promote heart disease. Binding sites on macrophages that mediate uptake and degradation of acetylated low-density lipoprotein. What does it say? It says that if you give a macrophage a native LDL molecule, this is a low-density lipoprotein molecule, which is a phospholipid monolayer that has proteins in the outside. So imagine a balloon with proteins stuck in the membrane. It's like a bus moving triglycerides and cholesterol around your body. If you give a macrophage that, the macrophage, which is an immune cell that resides below the endothelium inside of your blood vessels and is responsible for sort of the beginning histopathology of an endothelial lesion or a fatty streak leading to atherosclerosis, the macrophage will not take that LDL up. That LDL must be oxidized to be taken up by the macrophage. When you eat more linoleic acid, your LDL is much more likely to become oxidized. Do we think that could be an increased risk of cardiovascular disease? Is there any real cogent argument we could make by which that would not be an increased risk of cardiovascular disease? Plasma oxidized low-density lipoprotein, a strong predictor of acute coronary heart disease events in apparently healthy middle-aged men from the general population. Oxidized LDL may represent a promising risk marker for clinical coronary heart disease complications, should be evaluated in further studies. If you want to measure your oxidized LDL, what I would recommend is talking to your doctor and having them order a test through a company called Boston Heart. I have no association. This is the only company I'm aware of that does the test. It's called oxidized phospholipids on ApoB. A regular oxidized LDL test is not a good test for oxidized LDL because it is a Boolean assay. It is using a monoclonal antibody, which if it sees 1 or 2 phospholipids on the LDL that are oxidized, it will come up as positive. Boolean means 1 or 0. It means true or false. Oxidized phospholipids on ApoB from Boston Heart gives you a much more accurate assay of the percentage of the phospholipids on any LDL particle that are oxidized. Seed oil risks are exaggerated, says the AFE fact check. Well, if you listen to any of the things that I've said so far, I think that there's a significant amount of evidence to say that they are harmful for humans. Dariush Mazafarian is the first author on the study. They quote him saying that seed oils come from nuts, seeds, and beans, which are some of the healthiest foods on the planet. When humans eat these oils, their risk factors get better. They have fewer heart attacks. They have less weight gain. They are healthier than those who use other kinds of cooking fats. He added that while industrial processing destroys some of the beneficial properties of seed oils, if you want to know who this guy is, again, he's at Tufts. He's the chair of nutrition there. And he was behind the 2018 Food Compass Guidelines. If you guys are not familiar with these, look these up. I did a reel on Instagram on these. These ranked foods according to a metric looking at the overall quality of the food and the nutritional promoting qualities. On the Food Compass Guidelines, chaired by this guy, frosted mini wheats were at the top. They perhaps were not the best food, but they were pretty high. They were far above things like an egg cooked in butter and ground beef. Anyone that devises a system that is going to rank frosted mini wheats, Cheerios, Honey Nut Cheerios, egg substitute with seed oils above a real egg cooked in butter and ground beef, and not just above them, but far above them, we have massive differences in the way we see the nutrition landscape. And those type of conversations need to happen. Those conversations need to not be swept under the rug with a pithy, partly false misinformation tag on Instagram. We need to have some serious conversations with people who believe this and ask them in a respectful way how they can make claims that seed oils are healthy for humans in light of all the evidence I shared, which is just the tip of the iceberg. The effects on coronary heart disease of increasing polyunsaturated fat in place of saturated fat, a systematic review of and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. So this looks like a good title until you realize that what he's done is conflate omega-3 with omega-6. So he's lumped studies looking at omega-3 fats with omega-6 fats, which are totally different fats in human physiology. So right from the get-go, you have something that is quite misleading regarding polyunsaturated fat. If you look at the list of excluded studies from this meta-analysis, conveniently, Darius Mozaffarian and his group have excluded randomized controlled trials from the 60s and 70s, specifically the Minnesota coronary trial and the Sydney Diet Heart trial, which showed worsening rates of coronary artery disease, coronary events, and death when you had more seed oils in the diet.